Hope Logan's world was never one of stillness. It was always a world spinning on the axis of desire and disappointment, anchored by fierce love and just as fierce betrayals. But nothing in her past could prepare her for the quiet, life-altering moment when two pink lines stared back at her from a pregnancy test clutched in trembling hands. For days, she had tried to ignore the nausea, the unshakable fatigue, the unsettling awareness that something inside her was changing. It wasn't until that morning alone in her bathroom, sunlight slicing across the tile, that Hope finally allowed herself to face what she had suspected. She was pregnant. And not just newly, so the tests confirmed it later that same day at the hospital. She was already 2 months along. The memories came rushing in. That one night with Carter Walton, long before everything had unraveled. Before betrayal, before Steffi's manipulations and the cold silences that followed. Back then, there had still been a flicker of hope between them, and in a rare moment of vulnerability, they'd allowed themselves to fall into something tender and real. Now, as her fingers cradled the ultrasound photo, the faint curve of life-forming hope was torn between terror and awe. She had to tell Carter. There was no hiding it, no waiting for the right time. But the right time had already passed. And Carter, he wasn't the man she remembered anymore. Rumors swirled like smoke through the halls of Forrester. Whispers that Carter was getting close to Daphne Rose, that he had grown colder toward Hope, more calculating. Could he still be the man who once said he wanted a family with her, who whispered dreams in her ear after midnight? Hope's chest tightened as she stood outside Carter's office, the envelope containing her scanned photos held tightly in her hand. When she finally entered, Carter looked surprised, hesitant even, but she didn't let him speak first. She placed the envelope on his desk, watched his hands open it, watched his eyes widen. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw softness return to his face. But then the questions began. How far along? Was she certain? And then the one that knocked the air from her lungs, are you sure it's mine? Hope recoiled, devastated, even as Carter quickly apologized. But the damage was done. Still, she held her ground. Yes, she was sure. There hadn't been anyone else. This was his child. Their child. The silence that followed was unbearable. Carter leaned back, hands steepled, and said nothing. The warmth she remembered was gone. In its place was the cold mask of a man already buried under too many complications. Hope didn't press. She gave him space. But inside, her heart ached with fear that he might reject not only her, but their unborn child. Meanwhile, elsewhere in Los Angeles, Electra basked in the glow of her rising star. Appearances, accolades, headlines, everything was aligning perfectly. She was becoming the face of something new, something radiant. And Will stood beside her, proud but confused. She hadn't allowed intimacy. Not yet. And while he respected that, the unspoken tension between them grew heavier with every passing day. Electra hadn't told him the truth. She was still a virgin. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of becoming vulnerable. She had built a wall of charm and ambition between herself and Will's increasingly pointed advances. And though Will remained patient, supportive even, frustration had begun to fester. It was that very hesitation Electra feared would drive him into the arms of someone else, someone like Luna. Luna, ever watchful, ever calculating, had remained quiet for weeks. But now, she saw her moment approaching. With Will drifting emotionally and Electra distracted by her success, Luna began to make her move. Not alone, of course. Sheila, Luna's ever-sinister grandmother, hovered at her side, always whispering, always scheming. Together, they plotted a plan as old as betrayal itself: drugs in a drink, the staged vulnerability of a darkened bedroom, and a setup that could trap Will in an act that would devastate Electra forever. It hadn't happened yet, but the wheels were in motion. Sheila and Luna weren't just playing games. They were preparing for war. Back at Forrester, the walls of history continued to creak under the weight of unfinished love stories. Ridge, ever the tortured soul between two worlds, once again found himself torn between Taylor and Brooke. Though he loved Brooke, had always loved Brooke, his loyalty to Taylor and her fragile heart kept him from returning to the woman who had both saved and destroyed him time and again. Taylor, radiant and stable on the surface, was still healing from the last time Ridge walked away. Doctors had warned her of the toll stress could take, of the emotional triggers that could send her spiraling. And Ridge, carrying the guilt of every broken promise, knew that if he abandoned her again, it might not just break her heart, it could break her completely. But what if Brooke, not Taylor, was the next to face a health crisis? What if years of heartache and emotional wounds had worn her down more than anyone knew? The possibility haunted Ridge even as he tried to do what was right. And still, Brooke lingered, always near, always silently waiting. Ridge's indecision rippled through the family, creating fractures that threatened to splinter again. Just as Hope, Brooke's daughter, was facing the most uncertain future of all. Hope's pregnancy brought her closer to Carter, despite the uncertainty between them. There were moments, brief, fleeting, where the old warmth flickered back to life. But every time it did, Daphne Rose appeared like a ghost in the corner, whispering doubts, undermining progress, reminding Carter of the cost of getting too close to Hope again. Daphne was more than just a former fling or a business strategist. She had ambition sharpened into weaponry, and she wasn't about to let Carter slip from her grasp. Hope saw it, felt it, knew it, and yet she wouldn't back down. Not this time. This child changed everything. And yet the shadows grew darker with each passing day. Liam, who had once been the center of Hope's universe, was facing his own descent. The tumor in his brain was worsening. He struggled to read to Kelly, forgetting words he used to know, faltering in ways that terrified him. He hadn't told anyone yet, not even Finn, but the symptoms were progressing. Hope suspected something was wrong, but Liam brushed it off, always smiling, always deflecting. The truth was, he didn't want to die in front of them. He wanted to protect Hope, protect Kelly, even protect Steffi and Finn from the burden of watching him fade away. But secrets don't stay buried forever. Finn noticed the signs: slurred speech, delayed reaction, the confusion in Liam's eyes. As a doctor, he couldn't ignore it. But he was also Liam's friend, Steffi's husband, and caught between the ethics of care and the bonds of loyalty. Telling Hope might break Liam's trust. Not telling her might cost Liam his life. It was a moral battlefield Finn never wanted to walk. But the time was coming when he would have to choose. Hope, pregnant and overwhelmed, continued to chase clarity. She wanted stability. She wanted a partner who wouldn't disappear or deceive. Carter seemed like the answer, if only he could step away from Daphne, if only he could trust again. But Daphne wasn't letting go. She moved strategically, placing herself at Carter's side during meetings, inviting him to off-site conferences, playing the role of confidant while undermining Hope in subtle, cruel ways. And Carter, torn between his past mistakes and the promise of something new, was losing his balance. Electra's star, meanwhile, began to dim. The media turned. The whispers about her relationship with Will grew louder. Paparazzi hounded them, and questions about their intimacy or lack thereof became tabloid fodder. Electra finally told Will the truth, through tears and shame. She had never been with anyone. Will, stunned but supportive, promised he wasn't going anywhere. But Luna had already laid her trap. And Sheila, ever the puppeteer, was ready to pull the strings. As all these stories spiraled toward collision, one thing became clear: Hope Logan was no longer the fragile dreamer she once was. She was a mother, a fighter, and a woman unwilling to let her story be written by anyone else. Whether Carter stood beside her or not, she would protect her child. Whether Steffi continued to interfere or Ridge chose Brooke or Taylor, Hope would face it head-on. The truth about Liam's illness would shatter hearts. Electra's reckoning with Luna and Sheila would shake reputations. And through it all, Hope would carry her secret, her strength, and her unborn child into a future still unwritten but no longer feared. In the end, CBS's The Bold and the Beautiful wasn't just about fashion or power. It was about survival. And Hope Logan was ready to survive.